"I don't have an attitude problem," Marcus replied quietly, his hands continuing to organize his papers. "I just prefer to focus on my work." "That right there," Tyler said, stepping closer. "That's exactly what we're talking about. You think you're so smart, so above it all. But you know what? I think you need a lesson in respect." Sean had moved close enough now that Marcus could smell the protein bar on his breath. Danny remained by the door, occasionally glancing into the hallway to watch for janitors or late-working teachers. The positioning was perfect. Tyler pulled the tube of adhesive from the bag, along with a small plastic applicator. "This stuff bonds in seconds and takes hours to dissolve. Imagine trying to explain to your dad why you can't see for the weekend. Imagine sitting in the emergency room while doctors try to figure out how to separate your eyelids without damaging your corneas." For the first time, Marcus felt a genuine chill of fear. He'd expected physical intimidation, maybe some humiliation, but this was beyond cruel. This could cause permanent damage. The realization that Tyler was willing to risk blinding him shifted something fundamental in Marcus's chest. "You can't be serious," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dead serious," Tyler replied, unscrewing the cap. "Unless you want to get on your knees right now and beg us to reconsider. Tell us how sorry you are for being such a stuck-up little freak." Marcus looked around the lab, his eyes taking in Sean's position near the emergency shower, Danny's stance by the door, Tyler's confident posture as he prepared the adhesive. Everything was exactly where he needed it to be. "I am sorry," Marcus said, his voice carrying genuine emotion for the first time. "I'm sorry you're about to find out what happens when you corner someone who's been preparing for this moment." Tyler laughed, mistaking Marcus's words for desperate bargaining. "Too late for apologies, Sean. Hold him." Sean stepped forward to grab Marcus's arms, but Marcus was already moving. His hand went to his shirt pocket and pressed a sequence of buttons on the device hidden there. Instantly, every piece of electronic equipment in the science lab began to respond to signals that had been dormant in their systems for weeks. The emergency shower above Sean activated without warning, drenching him in freezing water and sending him stumbling backward into a cart of glassware. The automatic door locks engaged with loud clicks, trapping Danny against the exit. But these were just the opening moves. Marcus had spent months learning the school's electrical systems, mapping every circuit and identifying every device connected to the network. The modifications he'd made were subtle but comprehensive, turning the entire building into an extension of his will. Tyler spun around as the lab's ventilation system roared to life, creating a wind that scattered papers and knocked over lightweight equipment. The overhead projector began flashing strobing lights while speakers hidden throughout the school began broadcasting a recording Tyler recognized with growing horror. It was his own voice from earlier that week, discussing the crazy glue plan in explicit detail. But not just that recording. Marcus had been collecting audio for months, documenting every cruel comment, every threat, every moment of planning their attacks. Now it was playing simultaneously through every speaker in the building, echoing through empty hallways and reaching the ears of the night security guard who had just started his rounds. Danny was pulling frantically at the door handle when the laboratory's chemical shower system activated above him, spraying him with the same emergency wash solution designed to neutralize dangerous spills. Sean, still soaked and shivering, tried to reach for his phone only to discover that the school's cell tower had mysteriously lost signal in the immediate area. Tyler stood frozen in the center of the chaos, the tube of adhesive still in his hand as he realized that everything around him was responding to Marcus's control. The quiet kid he'd dismissed as helpless had somehow turned the entire building into a weapon aimed directly at him and his friends. But Marcus wasn't finished. As the recordings continued to broadcast their crimes to anyone within hearing distance, he activated the final component of his system, and Tyler Brooks learned what real helplessness felt like. The laboratory had transformed into something resembling a technological nightmare, but Marcus remained perfectly calm at its center. While Tyler clutched the tube of adhesive and stared in disbelief at the chaos erupting around him, Marcus reached into his backpack and withdrew a tablet that most people would have mistaken for a standard school device. In reality, it was the command center for a network he'd been building since his first week at Riverside Academy. The screen displayed a detailed map of the school with dozens of blinking indicators showing the location and status of every electronic device he'd compromised. Security cameras, fire alarms, intercom systems, even the automated coffee machine in the faculty lounge, all responded to his commands. But the real masterpiece wasn't the hardware he'd modified. It was the intelligence he'd gathered. Tyler's recorded voice continued echoing through the building's speaker system, but now it was joined by Danny's nervous laughter and Sean's enthusiastic agreement to increasingly cruel plans. Months of conversations they'd assumed were private played for anyone still in the building to hear. The night janitor had stopped his cleaning cart in the hallway below, listening with growing concern to detailed discussions of assault and psychological torture. "Turn it off," Tyler shouted over the noise, but his voice lacked its usual commanding tone. For the first time in his high school career, he sounded frightened. Marcus tapped his tablet, and the immediate chaos in the lab quieted to a manageable level. The emergency showers stopped spraying, though Sean remained soaked and shivering against the wall. The ventilation system returned to normal speed, and the strobing lights settled into a steady, ominous glow. But the recordings continued broadcasting throughout the school, now accompanied by timestamps and location data that made their authenticity undeniable. "You want to know what I've been working on all those late nights?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a confidence that none of them had ever heard before. "I've been studying you. Every pattern, every habit, every weakness." He swiped across his tablet, and new displays appeared on every screen in the lab. Photos of Tyler vandalizing school property, videos of Danny stealing from unlocked lockers, evidence of Sean cheating on exams by photographing answer keys. But these weren't random incidents Marcus had stumbled across. They were systematic documentation of crimes the three had committed over months, captured by cameras they never knew existed. Tyler's face went pale as he recognized himself in a video that showed him planting stolen items in another student's locker, framing an innocent kid for theft. "Where did you get these?" "I put micro cameras everywhere you go," Marcus replied matter-of-factly. "Your lockers, your usual hangout spots, even your cars. Did you know Danny's been selling prescription drugs he steals from his grandmother? Or that Sean's been hacking into the school's grading system to change not just his scores, but yours too, Tyler?" Danny tried to rush toward Marcus, but his feet slipped on the wet floor, sending him crashing into a table full of beakers. The sound of breaking glass mixed with his cry of pain as he clutched his arm, blood seeping through his shirt from multiple cuts. Sean made his own attempt to reach the emergency door, but Marcus had anticipated this too. The magnetic locks engaged with a solid thunk, and Sean's shoulder struck solid steel instead of the exit he expected. He bounced backward, dazed and defeated. "The recordings you're hearing now are being automatically uploaded to cloud servers in 12 different countries," Marcus continued, his fingers dancing across the tablet surface.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Copies are being sent to the principal's office, the school board, the police department, and a few local news outlets that love stories about privileged kids getting away with assault." Tyler dropped the tube of adhesive, his hands shaking. "You can't do this. My father will destroy you. He'll destroy your whole family. Your father's construction company has been using substandard materials in school renovations for the past 3 years. Marcus replied calmly, "I have documentation of every safety violation, every bribe, every corner cut that put students at risk. Try to destroy my family, and I'll make sure his company faces federal charges for endangering children. The tablet in Marcus's hands chimed with an incoming message. That's security confirming they've heard the recordings and are on their way up. They should arrive in about 90 seconds. For the first time, Sean found his voice. Please, Marcus. We were just messing around. We weren't really going to hurt you. Marcus looked at the tube of industrial adhesive on the floor, then back at Sean. You were going to glue my eyes shut. Do you understand what that could have done to me? The panic of not being able to see, the chemical burns, the possibility of permanent damage. The laboratory door's magnetic lock disengaged with a soft click, and the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the hallway. But instead of security guards, Principal Harrison appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. Behind her stood Officer Martinez from the local police department, along with 2 other adults Marcus didn't recognize. Mr. Chun, Principal Harrison said, surveying the scene with practiced eyes. Are you injured? No, ma'am. But Danny needs medical attention for those cuts. Officer Martinez approached Tyler, who was still standing frozen beside the scattered chemistry equipment. Tyler Brooks, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault with a dangerous weapon. You have the right to remain silent. As handcuffs clicked around Tyler's wrists, he stared at Marcus with a mixture of rage and disbelief. This isn't over. You think you're so smart, but you have no idea what you've started. Marcus met his gaze steadily. I started this the first day you decided to target me. I've spent months preparing for every possible escalation, including this one. Your father's lawyers are good, but they can't argue with video evidence of attempted assault. Danny was helped to his feet by a paramedic who had arrived with the police, his arm wrapped in temporary bandages. Sean stood against the wall. No longer the intimidating presence he'd been just minutes earlier. Both of them avoided looking at Marcus directly. The adults continued their work, documenting the scene and collecting evidence. But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. The recordings would spread beyond the school, reaching parents and community members who had always wondered about the behavior of these particular students. The evidence he'd gathered would ensure legal consequences that couldn't be bought off or explained away. But as Officer Martinez led Tyler toward the door, Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted in the school's ecosystem. The quiet kid who had seemed like such an easy target had revealed himself to be the most dangerous person in the building, and everyone would know it by Monday morning. Monday morning at Riverside Academy felt like stepping into an alternate universe. News of the science lab incident had spread through the student body over the weekend with the speed and efficiency of a viral outbreak. Marcus walked through the main entrance to find conversations stopping mid-sentence as students turned to stare at him with expressions ranging from awe to nervous uncertainty. The hallways buzzed with whispered discussions about the recordings that had played throughout the building Friday evening. Students who had never paid attention to Tyler Brooks's victims were suddenly sharing stories of his crew's harassment, emboldened by the evidence that their tormentors could actually face consequences. The administrative response had been swift and decisive. Tyler, Danny, and Sean were suspended pending criminal charges, their lockers cleared out and their presence banned from campus. Marcus made his way to his first period class, acutely aware that his usual invisibility had been permanently shattered. Students who had previously looked through him now watched his every movement, trying to reconcile the quiet kid they thought they knew with the technological mastermind who had orchestrated such a comprehensive takedown. Some seemed impressed. Others appeared worried about what else he might be capable of. In a P Physics, Mrs. Rodriguez pulled him aside before class began. Marcus, I wanted to speak with you about your technical skills. What you accomplished Friday night required knowledge far beyond what we teach in our computer science program. I've always been interested in electronics and programming, Marcus replied carefully. It's just a hobby. She studied him with the analytical gaze of someone who had taught gifted students for 2 decades. That level of system integration isn't a hobby, it's professional grade work. Have you considered what you want to do after graduation? The question hung in the air as other students filed into the classroom. Marcus had spent so much time focused on surviving high school that he'd barely thought about what came next. But Mrs. Rodriguez's words stayed with him throughout the morning, mixing with the strange new reality of being noticed, of having power instead of being powerless. At lunch, Marcus sat at his usual corner table, but instead of eating in solitude, he found himself approached by Jake Williams, a senior who edited the school newspaper. Jake was known for his investigative pieces about administrative policies and his general skepticism toward authority figures. "Mind if I sit?" Jake asked, already pulling out a chair. "I've been thinking about what happened Friday, and I have some questions." Marcus gestured for him to continue, though he remained wary. Trust didn't come easily after months of isolation. The technical sophistication of what you did suggests you've been planning this for a long time, Jake said, keeping his voice low. "But here's what interests me. You didn't just gather evidence of them bullying you. You documented crimes they committed against other students, administration corruption, even safety violations in school construction." "I believe in being thorough," Marcus replied. Jake leaned closer. "That's not thoroughness, that's investigation. You've been conducting surveillance on a scale that would impress professional journalists. Which makes me wonder what else you've uncovered about this place." Before Marcus could respond, Jake slid a folder across the table. "I've been working on a story about grade manipulation in the athletics department. Missing funds from the student activity budget. Favoritism in college recommendation letters for donors' kids. But I've hit walls trying to get evidence." Marcus opened the folder and scanned the preliminary research. Jake had identified the right patterns, but lacked the proof needed to publish. "You want my help. I want to know if you're interested in real change here, or if Friday was just personal." Revenge. Jake's expression was serious. "Because if you care about justice, there's a lot more work to do." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Emma Vasquez, a junior Marcus recognized from advanced mathematics classes. She approached their table with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being heard. "Marcus Chun," she said, sliding into the remaining chair without invitation. "We need to talk." Jake looked between them uncertainly. "Emma, we were in the middle of something. This is more important." She turned her full attention to Marcus. "What you did Friday night was impressive, but it also drew attention from people you probably don't want noticing you." Marcus felt a familiar chill of caution. "What kind of attention?" Emma pulled out her phone and showed him a screenshot of a news article. The headline read, "High school student uses advanced surveillance network to expose bullying ring." The article included details that hadn't been released to local media, suggesting someone with inside knowledge had leaked information to national outlets. This story appeared on 3 different technology blogs over the weekend. Emma continued. "It's being shared in circles where people discuss computer security, artificial intelligence, and digital privacy. The kind of places where corporate recruiters and government agencies go looking for talent." The implications hit Marcus like a physical weight. He'd been so focused on dealing with Tyler and his crew that he hadn't considered how his actions might appear to outside observers. "Are you saying I'm in trouble?" "I'm saying you've demonstrated capabilities that certain organizations find very interesting," Emma replied. "My father works in cybersecurity for a defense contractor. He showed me your case study this morning and asked if I knew you personally." Jake's journalistic instincts kicked in. "Wait, your dad works for the government?" "Adjacent to it," Emma said carefully. "The point is, Marcus has options now. The question is whether he understands what those options mean." Marcus studied Emma's face, trying to read her intentions. "What do you know about my situation?" "I know that someone with your skills doesn't develop them in isolation. I know that the surveillance network you built required resources and knowledge that most high school students don't have access to. And I know that there are people who would very much like to understand how you acquired those capabilities. The cafeteria around them continued its normal chaos of teenage social dynamics, but Marcus felt increasingly disconnected from it all. The conversation was moving into territory he'd hoped to avoid, raising questions about his background that he'd spent years keeping buried. "Let's say I'm interested in hearing more," Marcus said cautiously. "What would that conversation look like?" Emma glanced around the cafeteria, then back at Marcus. "Not here. Too many ears, too many phones recording everything. There's a place we can meet after school where we can talk privately," Jake protested. "Hold on, I was here first. Marcus, if you're going to expose corruption in this school, the student body deserves to know what you find." "The student body deserves to be safe," Emma countered. "And Marcus deserves to understand all his options before making decisions. That could change his entire future." Marcus looked between them, recognizing that he was at a crossroads he hadn't anticipated. Jake represented the path of local activism, using his skills to fight injustice within the familiar boundaries of his current world. Emma's offer suggested something larger, more complex, with implications he couldn't yet grasp. The lunch bell rang, ending their conversation but not resolving the tension. As students began clearing their tables and heading to afternoon classes, Marcus realized that Friday night's confrontation had been just the beginning. He'd wanted to stop 3 bullies from hurting him, but instead he'd opened a door to a world where his abilities had value beyond anything he'd imagined. The question now was whether he was ready to step through that door, and what he might lose in the process. After school, Marcus found himself standing at the entrance to Millbrook's abandoned steel mill, a massive complex that had once employed half the town before closing in the 1990s. Emma had chosen the location for their meeting, explaining that the thick steel walls would block any electronic surveillance while the isolated setting would prevent eavesdropping. As he walked through the rusted gates, Marcus wondered if he was making a mistake trusting someone he barely knew. Emma was waiting inside the main building, standing near a shaft of sunlight that streamed through broken windows high above. She wasn't alone. A tall man in a dark suit stood beside her, his posture suggesting military training and his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. This had to be her father, Marcus Chun, the man said, extending his hand. "I'm David Vasquez, Emma's father. Thank you for agreeing to meet." Marcus shook his hand cautiously. "Emma said you wanted to discuss my situation." "Your situation is more complex than you realize," David replied. "The surveillance network you built at Riverside Academy demonstrates capabilities that typically require years of specialized training and access to resources that most civilians never see. My colleagues in the intelligence community are very curious about how a 16-year-old acquired such skills." The directness of the statement caught Marcus off guard. He'd expected more small talk, more gradual revelation of whatever agenda was driving this conversation. "I taught myself. Online tutorials, salvaged equipment, trial and error," David nodded slowly. "That's what we assumed initially. But our analysis of your system's architecture suggests knowledge of protocols and techniques that aren't available in public educational materials." "Someone taught you, Marcus. Someone with access to classified methodologies." A cold realization began forming in Marcus's mind. His father's long hours at the factory, his reluctance to discuss his work, the sophisticated electronic components that occasionally appeared in their garage without explanation. Marcus had always assumed his dad was just bringing home industrial salvage, but what if there was more to it? "My father works at the Millbrook manufacturing plant," Marcus said carefully. "He's a floor supervisor." "Your father, Chun Wei, immigrated from China 15 years ago," David continued. "Before that, he worked for a technology company in Shenzhen that had contracts with the Chinese military. Our records show he applied for asylum citing political persecution, but certain gaps in his background have always raised questions. Emma stepped closer, her expression sympathetic but determined. Marcus, we think your father has been training you without you realizing it, teaching you skills that go far beyond hobby electronics. The question is whether you're willing to help us understand what he shared with you. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. His father had never explicitly taught him anything about surveillance or computer infiltration, but looking back, Marcus could see the pattern. The way his dad had guided his early experiments with circuit boards. The discarded equipment that always seemed perfectly suited to Marcus's current projects. The casual suggestions about system architecture that had seemed like innocent conversation. "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked. David's expression became more serious. "We want you to work with us. Your skills, properly developed and directed, could serve important national security interests. We can offer you training that would make your high school surveillance network look like a child's toy. Full college scholarships, guaranteed employment. After graduation, access to technology that most people can only dream about. And in exchange, you help us understand what your father taught you. You allow us to analyze the techniques you've developed. And eventually, you use those skills in service of your country." Marcus felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This wasn't just about choosing the career path or deciding how to use his abilities. This was about fundamentally altering the trajectory of his entire life and potentially betraying his father's trust in the process. "I need time to think about this," Marcus said. Emma spoke up. "There's something else you should know." Jake Williams contacted 3 major news outlets about the corruption stories he wants to investigate. If those stories get published with your technical evidence, it won't just be government agencies taking notice. Criminal organizations, foreign intelligence services, anyone with an interest in your capabilities will know exactly who you are and where to find you. The threat was clear, though delivered gently. Marcus's window for making this decision quietly was closing rapidly. Soon, his choice would be between working with David's organization or dealing with much less friendly parties who might have different ideas about how to use his skills. Marcus looked around the abandoned factory, thinking about how quickly his life had changed. A week ago, his biggest concern was avoiding Tyler Brooks in the hallways. Now he was being recruited by government agencies and warned about international threats. The quiet kid who just wanted to be left alone had become someone whose abilities made him valuable to forces he'd never imagined. "If I agree to work with you," Marcus said slowly, "what happens to my father?" David's expression softened slightly. "Your father made his choices 15 years ago when he decided to seek asylum here. We're not interested in prosecuting historical cases. We're interested in moving forward constructively. And if I refuse, then you go back to your normal life, at least until someone else decides your skills are too valuable to leave unmonitored." Marcus understood the subtext. This wasn't really a choice between joining their organization or maintaining his freedom. It was a choice between working with people who claimed to have America's interests at heart, or eventually being approached by others whose motivations might be far less benign. "I'll do it," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was committing to, "but I have conditions." David smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't. What do you want?" "My father's past stays buried. My mother gets the medical treatment she needs for her diabetes, the kind our insurance doesn't cover. And Jake Williams gets the evidence he needs to expose the corruption at school, even if I'm not around to help him investigate it personally." "Done," David replied without hesitation. "Welcome to a larger world, Marcus." As they walked back toward the mill's entrance, Emma fell into step beside him. "Any regrets about Friday night? About how all this started?" Marcus thought about Tyler Brooks, probably sitting in a detention center waiting for his hearing. About Danny and Sean, whose families were scrambling to hire lawyers and manage the fallout from their crimes being broadcast throughout the community. About the students at Riverside Academy who would never again have to fear those particular predators. No, Marcus said firmly. Tyler and his friends needed to be stopped. I just didn't expect it to lead here. Life has a way of taking us places we never expected, Emma replied. The question is what we do when we arrive. Marcus looked back at the abandoned factory one last time, knowing he was leaving behind more than just a building. He was leaving behind the quiet, invisible existence he'd constructed for himself, trading it for something far more complex and dangerous. But for the first time since starting high school, he felt like he was moving towards something instead of just trying to survive. The boy who had been cornered in a science lab with a tube of crazy glue was gone, replaced by someone who understood that real power meant accepting responsibility for how it was used, and Marcus Chun was ready for whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. In the dusty science lab of Riverside Academy, 3 seniors corner a scrawny sophomore with a tube of industrial adhesive and a plan so twisted it would make devils cringe. They want to glue Marcus Chun's eyes permanently shut. But in less than 2 minutes, those same bullies will be crying for their mothers, begging campus security to protect them from the quiet kid they thought was helpless. What they don't know is that Marcus has been building something in secret, and their cruel prank just activated the most devastating revenge scheme their small town has ever witnessed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Chun moved through the hallways of Riverside Academy like smoke, barely registering on anyone's radar. At 16, he had perfected the art of blending into beige lockers and fading into classroom corners. His black hair hung in unruly waves that he never bothered styling, and his thrift store clothes hung loose on his thin frame. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, his dark eyes held a sharpness that most people missed, too distracted by his unremarkable exterior to notice the calculating intelligence beneath. Riverside Academy sat perched on a hill overlooking the industrial town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a place where the steel mills had closed decades ago, but the blue-collar mentality remained. The school itself was a mixture of old brick buildings and newer additions, creating a campus that felt both historic and haphazardly modern. Here, social status wasn't determined by designer clothes or fancy cars, but by toughness, athletic ability, and the willingness to push others down to climb higher. Marcus occupied the bottom rung of this hierarchy, which suited him fine. While his classmates worried about weekend parties and football games, he spent his time in the computer lab or tinkering in his bedroom with electronics he'd salvaged from the town dump. His single father worked double shifts at the remaining factory, leaving Marcus alone most evenings to pursue his real passion, understanding how things worked, and more importantly, how they could be made to work differently. The Academy's social ecosystem was ruled by 3 seniors who had made terrorizing underclassmen their personal hobby. Tyler Brooks was their leader, a broad-shouldered wrestler with sun-bleached hair and the kind of confident smirk that came from never facing real consequences. His father owned the largest construction company in town, which meant Tyler had grown up believing rules were suggestions and authority figures were just people who hadn't been properly intimidated yet. His right hand was Danny Kovac, a lanky basketball player whose cruelty masked his fear of being cast out by Tyler's inner circle. Danny had learned early that laughing at Tyler's jokes and participating in his schemes was easier than becoming a target himself. The third member of their trio was Sean Murphy, a stocky football player whose family had lived in Millbrook for generations. Sean provided the muscle when Tyler's schemes required physical intimidation, though he was smart enough to let others do the planning. They had first noticed Marcus during his freshman year, when he'd accidentally bumped into Tyler in the cafeteria. Instead of apologizing profusely like most kids would, Marcus had simply adjusted his glasses, muttered, "Excuse me," and continued to his usual corner table. The lack of fear in Marcus's response had irritated Tyler, who was accustomed to immediate deference from younger students. What started as occasional shoulder checks in the hallway had gradually escalated over the months. They'd shoved his books into mud puddles, locked him in supply closets, and once even duct-taped him to a chair in the abandoned photography darkroom. Each incident was carefully planned to avoid security cameras and adult supervision, and Marcus never reported them. His silence wasn't born from fear, though Tyler and his crew interpreted it that way. Marcus simply understood that involving adults would only make things worse, and besides, he was gathering valuable data about his tormentors' patterns and behaviors. The spring semester had brought a new level of creativity to their harassment. Tyler had become obsessed with finding Marcus's breaking point, the moment when the quiet kid would finally crack and give him the satisfaction of complete dominance. They'd started targeting his few possessions, destroying his notebook sketches, and breaking his calculator. When Marcus simply replaced these items without complaint, Tyler's frustration grew. The idea for the crazy glue came to Tyler during a particularly boring chemistry class, where Mrs. Patterson was explaining the properties of different adhesives. He'd glanced over at Marcus, who was taking detailed notes as always, and imagined, what would happen if someone couldn't open their eyes for a few days? The thought made him grin, and by lunch, he'd shared the plan with Danny and Sean, who were eager to participate in what Tyler promised would be their most memorable prank yet. They'd been watching Marcus's routine for weeks, noting that he always stayed late on Fridays to work on extra credit projects in the science lab. The building would be nearly empty, with only the night janitor making rounds on the first floor, while the labs on the third floor sat vacant and unmonitored. It would be perfect. What Tyler and his crew didn't know was that Marcus had been watching them just as carefully. His seemingly random presence in hallways and classrooms was actually strategic positioning that allowed him to observe their conversations and planning sessions. While they saw a helpless victim, Marcus saw three predictable variables in an equation he was slowly solving. In his bedroom workshop, surrounded by salvaged circuit boards and modified electronics, Marcus had spent months building something that would change everything. Not a weapon in any traditional sense, but something far more sophisticated, something that would turn their own cruelty back on them in ways they couldn't imagine. The crazy glue incident they were planning would simply be the trigger that activated a revenge scheme elegant in its complexity and devastating in its precision. Friday afternoon was approaching, and Marcus could feel the familiar tension that preceded one of their attacks. But this time, instead of dread, he felt anticipation. Soon, Tyler Brooks and his friends would learn what happened when you cornered someone who had been quietly preparing for war. The science lab on the third floor of Riverside Academy felt different on Friday evenings. Without the chatter of students and the bustle of regular classes, the long tables covered in beakers and microscopes took on an almost ominous quality. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the equipment stations. The smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with the lingering odors of the day's experiments, creating an atmosphere that felt both sterile and foreboding. Marcus had chosen this particular Friday to work on his extra credit chemistry project, though. His real purpose was far more complex. He'd positioned himself at the station closest to the emergency shower, knowing from weeks of observation that Tyler's crew preferred to approach from the main entrance. His backpack sat nearby, seemingly innocent but containing modifications that would have impressed professional engineers. The project spread across his table appeared to be a standard analysis of molecular bonding, complete with detailed charts and calculations that would earn him an easy A. But Marcus's attention wasn't on the assignment. Instead, he monitored the small device hidden in his shirt pocket. A receiver that picked up signals from the microcameras he'd strategically placed throughout the school over the past month. The feeds showed him exactly where Tyler, Danny, and Sean were at any moment. At exactly 4:47 p.m., his device vibrated twice. Tyler's group was moving up the stairwell, and Marcus could see them through the hallway camera he'd hidden. Inside a fire extinguisher housing, Tyler carried a small plastic bag that Marcus knew contained the industrial adhesive they'd stolen from the maintenance closet. Danny held what appeared to be cotton swabs, while Sean carried zip ties, presumably to restrain Marcus while they carried out their plan. Marcus made a show of checking his phone and gathering his papers, as if preparing to leave. This was crucial to their psychology. They needed to believe they were trapping him, that he had no escape route and no advance warning. He'd studied their previous attacks extensively and understood that their satisfaction came from his apparent helplessness. The lab door opened with a soft click, and Marcus didn't look up from his work. He heard their footsteps, deliberately heavy to announce their presence and build fear. Tyler's voice carried across the empty lab, filled with the mock-casual tone he used when he wanted to sound threatening. "Working late again, Chun? That's dedication to your studies." Marcus finally looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "Just finishing some calculations. I'll be done soon." Danny moved to block the main exit while Sean positioned himself near the emergency door. Their coordination was practiced, the result of months of similar ambushes. But Marcus had anticipated this exact formation, had even counted on it. Tyler approached Marcus's station, the plastic bag now visible in his hand. "See, here's the thing. We've been thinking about your attitude problem. All semester, you act like you're better than everyone else. Like our conversations don't matter to you.